When the coffee shop exploded, I rushed in without hesitation to save my childhood sweetheart, Bob. He touched my disfigured face and wept uncontrollably. "Mary, if it weren't for me, you wouldn't look like this. If I ever betray you in this lifetime, I must be doomed to a terrible fate." But on the eve of our wedding, I saw his chat history with my best friend. I couldn't bear to live another day like this. "Betty, I love you. Once I get my hands on her inheritance, we can run away together." My best friend gleefully sent me Bob's alternate account. There were videos on it that I couldn't bear to watch. He captioned them, "Look at her disgusting face, like a female ghost. If I could redo life, I'd rather she never saved me." Unexpectedly, life truly gave me a chance to redo things. This time, as he wished, I didn't save him. I lay on the sofa sending invitations to family and friends, and Bob's phone nearby kept vibrating. "Bob, your phone is ringing." I called out twice, but he didn't hear from the closed kitchen where he was cooking. I struggled to get up, reaching for my cane. My movements were slow because of the explosion 2 years ago. Besides disfiguring my face, I had steel rods in my thighs, making it very difficult to move. I picked up the phone and was stunned to see a message from Betty, my best friend. Initially, Bob refused to add Betty on phone, saying he wanted to reassure me by not connecting with other women. I hesitantly opened the chat. But seeing their conversation, I could hardly believe my eyes. The sweet and caring boyfriend who always treated me so well, spoke of me in such vile terms. "I'm tired of pandering to Mary, can't stand another day like this. Betty, you're the one I love. Once I get Mary's inheritance, we will be out of here. By the way, babe, I'm coming to you tonight, remember to wear stockings for me." Why? Why? The pain in my heart was unbearable. How could my boyfriend, whom I had saved at the risk of my life, speak of me like this? Just yesterday, he knelt down in front of everyone and proposed to me. Trembling, I dialed Betty's number. She giggled maniacally after hearing my questions. "Oh, you found out, Mary. You didn't actually believe Bob truly loves you, did you? Look at your face in the mirror, wake up, I'll show you something good." She sent me an account. It had Bob's profile picture, but it was an unfamiliar account I had never seen. I had used Bob's phone before, and all his social media was filled with our photos. After getting hurt in the explosion, Bob had treated me with absolute devotion. As soon as I was discharged, with my mobility impaired, Bob insisted that he was my legs. Wherever I went, he held me tight, even standing outside the bathroom while I used it. To better care for me, he convinced my parents to let us live together. Bob woke up every day before 5 to prepare breakfast for me. Waiting to wake me up before serving it dinner was always according to my taste, spicy dishes even though he disliked them. He never shied away from my disfigured face. Every few days, he would flaunt our love on social media. He would show me screenshots of likes and happily tell me that everyone blessed us, feeling we were the most compatible couple. I often spotted his social media accounts showing our daily lives. Me chopping vegetables, him cooking, me painting, him posing as a model, me in therapy, him cheering me on. Comments from millions of followers were moved by his unwavering love. I had no regrets saving him, our life felt like a dream. Clicking into this account, all warmth in me froze to ice. Each video featured me, struggling out of bed, crying at my reflection, stumbling and getting up. My burnt face was especially clear in these videos. Because of the explosion, my left side looked twisted and horrifying, enough to make children cry at the sight. Among these videos were Bob and Betty's sweet diary entries. Climbing mountains to watch the sunrise, surfing at the beach, even feeding pigeons in Prague together. I painstakingly watched each video. Ironically, the one with the most likes was me in a red dress. Bob had bought me that dress, claiming the vibrant red color suited me best. But the caption read, "Look at this woman in the red dress, once a charming and promiscuous vixen." The comments below were mocking, and some profiles looked familiar, Bob's friends who frequently liked our Instagram photos. Disgusting. I couldn't even eat a morsel of food. What truly hurt me were Bob's replies. She saved me by herself, not my idea. She's the one who insisted on rushing in. Every time I see her face, I have to throw up when I get home. It's disgusting. I couldn't help but laugh loudly. Bob came out from the kitchen, seeing me in tears of laughter. His face lit up with joy until he noticed the phone in my hand. His expression turned to panic. He dropped the dish he was holding and lunged to grab the phone from me. I held on tight as he tried to wrestle it away, which led to him violently dragging me and smashing me to the ground. The scalding soup burnt my skin, the shattered shards tainted with my blood. Trembling, I lifted my head to look at the man carefully examining the phone. Why? I choked on my own voice. Bob's movements slowed as he finally turned to face me. He looked down at my disheveled form, an icy detachment in his voice. Yes, you saved me. But I've been with you for 2 whole years. Isn't that enough? Now that you know everything, I don't want to pretend anymore. If you're smart, transfer all the shares to me as compensation for my 2 years. You have no idea how difficult it is for me to see your ghostly face every day. My friends mock me behind my back, even ask me if I'm afraid to sleep at night. Look at yourself in the mirror, how disgusting. How can you stand beside me? If I were you, I would have broken up long ago. I've had enough, Mary. I'm grateful to you, but I can't force my feelings. Honestly, I've wished more than once to redo life. I'd rather you never saved me. I shook my head continuously, my nails scratching marks on the floor. Even if I had saved Bob, I had never once wanted to bind him forever. If he detested my current appearance, would just curse him as an ingrateful beast in my heart, then walk away. My family background and abilities were enough to support me without relying on anyone, let alone begging for pity. It was him who deceived me with a honeyed life of affection after my injury, only to now say, I'd rather you never saved me if life could start anew. You were nice to me because of my family's money. Isn't it? I won't give you a single penny. He sneered. I command you to leave my house right now. I don't want to see you anymore. Mary, did you think you're still the princess of your family, and I have to obey every word you say? Bob's face was obscured in the darkness, barely visible. A chill suddenly ran down my spine as I watched Bob closing in on me, feeling an inexplicable fear. My leg with the steel pins throbbed as standing was near impossible due to my weak state. The gate was opened, a purple lightning flashed by, accompanied by a thunder. My last memory was of a hand reaching out towards me and Bob's icy voice. What you give and what you don't, it's not up to you to decide. No. In the next moment, I opened my eyes wide, and the scenery around me changed. It was in front of the coffee shop off campus, where Bob and I used to meet during our 4 years in university. I was dressed in graduation attire, holding a rolled-up diploma in my hand, with the ribbon still unopened. I raised my hand to touch my left cheek, smooth and unblemished, no scars. Through the glass, I saw Bob sitting by the window, looking at me in disbelief. He suddenly stood up, wanting to walk out. I realized what was happening. Without much thought, I quickly lunged to the side. The huge impact almost lifted me off the ground, followed by a loud bang. The continuous screams, accompanied by the sound of shattering and collapsing. The firefighters helped me to a safe place. I looked back at the coffee shop billowing with black smoke. This time I wouldn't rush in. I couldn't help but touch my neck, feeling the icy touch of Bob's skin still lingering. I breathed a sigh of relief. Bob, I can't wait to see how you'll try to steal my money this time. Although I only had minor scrapes on me, the firefighters still insisted on taking me to the hospital. My parents, who rushed over after hearing the news, were terrified, checking me all over until they were sure I was okay. Mary, why aren't you speaking? Everything's fine, don't be afraid. Your mom and dad are here. Don't worry, honey, the doctor said your injuries are just minor scrapes and will heal in a few days. Dad, Mom. I hugged them and burst into tears. I hadn't felt much during the crisis just now, but seeing my parents made my tears flow uncontrollably. At this moment, I finally realized that the tragic fate of my past life had finally left me. From my mother, I learned that the coffee shop staff caused a gas leak due to improper operation, leading to the explosion. Just like in my past life, 4 people were injured in the coffee shop, with Bob being the most seriously injured and already taken to the emergency room. "How's Bob?" I asked. Our 2 families were business partners, and Bob and I had grown up together since childhood and liked each other. Our families fully supported our relationship, knowing each other inside out, and our personalities were very compatible. He's still in surgery, we don't know how he's doing. My mom patted me with a shiver of fear. I tried to suppress the smile that crept up on my lips, lowering my gaze. Let's go see him." Saying this, I pulled my parents towards the emergency room, walking briskly. My parents thought I was worried about Bob's safety, comforting me as we walked. From far away from the emergency room, I could hear Bob's mother crying mournfully. "Burns covering 50%? Facial disfigurement and possibly amputation." Amputation? That was far worse than what happened to me in my past life. In my previous life, I rushed in and desperately dragged Bob out of the rubble. Because of protecting him, I shielded myself from falling hot tiles and stones. The tiles fell on my face, causing disfigurement and burns. Stones struck my thigh, causing a shattered bone, and my right leg had to be fixed with a steel plate and nails, causing me to walk with a limp. If Bob were to be amputated, how could he, such a proud and self-righteous person, bear it? I gently patted my smooth, fair face. "Don't smile." "No, doctor, please. If he's amputated, how will my son manage in the future? He's supposed to take over our family's company." I coldly laughed inside. If there hadn't been an explosion in my past life, would have taken over the family business. But because of my disfigurement, which tarnished the company's image, Bob acted so well in front of my parents. My parents thought Bob would definitely marry me, truly treating him as the heir to groom, even handing over the management rights of the company to him in the end. After managing the company for over a year, Bob kept running at a loss, stock prices plummeting, and products getting complaints. On the other hand, their family business flourished, even snatching away many of our company's clients. I clearly remembered that he had a record on his phone saying, "It's good that she had an accident, otherwise her family's company wouldn't have fallen into my lap so easily." Before, my parents and friends always said she was better than me. Our friends around us would say I'm not good enough for her, but look at her face now. Adjusting my emotions, as I was about to walk over, an unexpected voice made me stop in my tracks. "Auntie, don't be sad, we're here with Bob. He'll pull through, nothing will happen to him." The sweet, gentle voice rang out, betrayals had long begun. My kind and gentle friend, at this moment, was holding a handkerchief, tenderly wiping the tears off Bob's mother's face. In my past life, I often complained to Betty about Bob's nighttime activities, and she would comfort me in the same tone. "I envy your relationship, Mary, but you're too strict. You need to give men their own space. Bob is so good to you, even when you were so badly injured, he didn't shun you. You have to trust him. It's just going out with friends for a drink. He's a man, entertaining is normal, give him some more money, don't let him lose face in front of his friends." At that time, Bob and Betty were probably laughing together. They were both spending the money I gave, while mocking me for being fooled and clueless. His mother wiped her tears, extremely touched. "Betty, thank you. When Bob said he wanted to be friends with you, his dad and I didn't agree. We still depended on investment from Mary's family. We made you accompany Bob without a title. We're sorry for how we treated you." So Bob's parents had known about Betty's presence a long time ago. They were secretly dating, permitted by Bob's parents. Since Betty was approved, in taking over the company, they truly deserved to be a family. And, I would be happy if I could be with Bob. Besides, Mary is also very good. She is prettier than me, comes from a wealthy family, and can provide more help to Bob. Betty bit her lip, blinked her watery eyes, then turned away and gently wiped the corners of her eyes. Seeing this, Bob's mother immediately held her. "You are such a considerate girl. Compared to you, Mary might be pretty, but where does she stand a chance? Bob often has to cater to her mood and be under her constant scrutiny. Speaking of Mary, where is she? Wasn't it said that she didn't have any major issues? Why haven't we seen her yet? My son is so severely injured, shouldn't she come over immediately to see him? Don't be angry. I heard that Mary also got a scratch, but after applying medicine for so long, she should be able to rush over soon." Superficially comforting, but actually inciting. Betty's words weren't very astute, but Bob's mother was already on the brink of collapsing due to her son's injuries, so this deliberate provocation amplified in her mind countless times. A scratch, a scratch. How can that compare to my son's injuries? Why is it that she's fine, while my son is disfigured and needs amputation? It must be her fault, she has jinxed my son. In a past life, she tightly held my hand and said, "Mary, you saved Bob. Aunt is grateful to you for a lifetime. You are our family's savior." Some people are truly hypocritical and always like to pin the blame on others. Now, Mrs. Young doesn't care if I am innocent or not. It doesn't matter if I harm others, but if I harm her son, it's a different story. My mother was so angry that she was about to rush over, but my father and I held her back. I shook my head, smiling at them, and pulled them away. It's all right. Bob ended up getting amputated. His right leg was amputated cleanly below the knee. 3 days later, the hospital reported that Bob had woken up. I put on a new red dress, applied a delicate makeup, brought the freshly stewed chicken soup made by the nanny, and arrived at Bob's VIP ward. Sounds of things being smashed emanated from the ward, mixed with Bob's weak, furious voice. How is it possible? How could I be so badly injured? No, no. I should be perfectly fine. How could this happen? Bob, please calm down. The doctor said you shouldn't get agitated. His mother's voice trembled as she gently tried to persuade him. Bob, Aunt and I have been watching over you for 3 whole days. If something were to happen to you, how would we go on living? Unexpectedly, Betty was quite resilient. Despite Bob being disabled and disfigured, she chose to stay, hoping she could persevere. Her words carried deep meaning, but unfortunately, Bob wasn't in the right mindset to contemplate. Where is Mary? Bring Mary here, I want to see her. I opened the door and walked in. The red dress swayed with my steps, accentuating my fair cheeks. 3 pairs of eyes focused on me, but I acted as if I didn't notice, placing the chicken soup on the nearest table to Bob. Why did you come so late? You've been absent while I've been lying in bed for days, and now you haven't even said a caring word. Bob woke up wanting to see me, but what about you? You have no conscience, Mary. Before I could say anything, Betty rushed forward, lecturing me in a flurry. His mother also stared at me with ice-cold eyes, full of disgust, as if I had ignited her heart. Betty gave a glance at Bob on the bed, and her eyes turned red with pity, which almost stirred my compassion. How did I not notice how good she was at acting? I purposely stood side by side with Betty, the neat and delicate makeup on my face contrasting starkly with the tired and disheveled Betty. As I expected, Bob didn't spare a glance for Betty, his gaze fixed on my red dress. I flashed a smile that amazed him. Bob, you're finally awake. My daily prayers to God must have worked. I carefully observed Bob. This was the first time I had seen him after the accident. Bob always had a considerate and gentle image in public, with eyes full of indulgence when he looked at me, a smile on his lips, but now, Bob could only see the ceiling. His face and body were wrapped in bandages, resembling a mummy. Broken pieces of a mirror lay on the floor, indicating he had realized the extent of his disfigurement. Considering how he was in my past life, it must have been hard for him to accept. When I spoke, he finally snapped out of it, then tried to sit up in excitement. But in his weakened state, he accidentally knocked over the chicken soup beside him, spilling it all over himself. Seeing him in such a disheveled state, I quickly turned my face away, pinching my thigh to keep from laughing out loud. Mary, why? Why didn't you save me? He glared at me with bloodshot eyes, accusing me sharply. My heart chilled. In the past life, I saved him out of love, but now he took it for granted. I covered my chest, looking genuinely sad. I really wanted to save you, Bob. But I was injured too and was taken to the hospital. Bob, are you blaming me for not risking an explosion, disfigurement, and broken legs to save you? I wiped away non-existent tears. You asked me to meet you at the coffee shop to tell me something important. What was it? Bob didn't respond, instead continued staring at me intently, as if trying to devour me. Mary, did you change because you were reborn? This made his mother and Betty freeze, while I feigned surprise, widening my eyes, looking at him perplexed. Bob, what's the matter? What do you mean by rebirth? What are you talking about? Bob seemed dazed, staring at me, saying, you should have saved me. If you saved me, I wouldn't have been hurt. Those injuries should be on you, and then I would take care of you, and everyone would be moved by me, and you should be with me. Yes, in the past life, that's what he did, earning everyone's praises and the full support of my parents, turning his family's insignificant company into a prominent household, and his way of repaying his savior was plotting harm for profit. Bob, have you damaged your brain? Why are you speaking nonsense? I quickly pressed the emergency button, calling his medical team before Bob could say anything more. After the doctors examined and explained, it turned out Bob had a minor concussion from being hit by a rock, which might cause some confusion in his memory, but he would recover in a few days. Bob no longer looked at me, holding his head helplessly, muttering to himself. Mary didn't reincarnate, why is that? Could it be because of me in the end? No. It's not my fault, she didn't give money, so why stay with a monster like that? If only I had let Mary continue, I regret it. I regret it. What should I do now? Can I transfer these injuries back to Mary? His muttered words were incomprehensible to others, but I understood clearly. My resentment nearly tore my chest apart. He still fantasized about transferring the damage to me. I touched my rapidly beating heart, gritting my teeth, pretending to be considerate as I adjusted his covers. Suddenly, Bob looked up, his eyes full of anticipation firmly fixed on me. Mary, you love me, don't you? Make a wish, say you willingly take on these injuries for me. I promise to treat you well in the future. No matter what you become, I will love you for a lifetime. I slowly exhaled a breath, pretending to be innocent, and flashed a harmless smile. Bob, what silly talk are you saying? Don't worry, Auntie has found the best doctor for you. Even though your right leg has been amputated, with a prosthetic leg, you can still live a normal life. His mother rushed up, trying to cover my mouth. But it was too late. My words clearly entered Bob's ears. What are you saying? Amputation? What amputation? Panic made him sit up suddenly, and he peeled back the blanket to see that half of his right leg was missing. How could this happen? Where is my leg? Last time Mary didn't get amputated, why was I amputated? No, this isn't right. He roared in horror, waving his hands frantically, even shaking off the needles attached to his hands. Mary, you've gone too far, don't provoke Bob anymore. Bob, don't be sad, I will always be with you, trust me. Betty's words were undoubtedly intended to clarify things between us. Betty was very clever. People are naturally most in need of care when they are most vulnerable. She wanted to capture Bob's heart in this way and make him admit their relationship. She exaggeratedly threw herself at Bob, hugging him tightly. It was quite moving, and she even took a dig at me, leaving Bob's own mother a step behind. Seeing the aunt with a pale face, I took a step back. Bob had already sunk into his own world of madness. He probably didn't even hear Betty's words, let alone feel touched by them. Instead, due to Betty's coercion, he scratched Betty fiercely a few times. Luckily he didn't have much strength, so Betty only had 2 not-so-light red marks on her face. Bob, you... Bob didn't mean it, why did you come so close? She helped her son speak, making Betty holding her face endure the pain, pretending to be generous. No. This isn't real. I'm dreaming, it must be a dream, I'll wake up and it'll be fine. Bob tried to get out of bed, but he was too weak, his body swayed and he fell out of bed, crashing onto the broken mirror. Ah! Bob screamed in pain. The wound split open, oozing blood mixed with the unclean chicken soup, making a mess on the floor. Just like how I was back then. Bob. Someone help. Bob, what happened to you? Bob lying on the ground twitched, Yang's mother screamed in horror. Betty only knew how to cry loudly. The room was a mess, a chaotic mess. It's really pathetic, Bob. I silently admired for a moment, then pressed the emergency button. Bob had taken over the company for 2 years, and he knew all the loopholes in the company. Although he had no spare thoughts now, but once he recovered, there was no guarantee he wouldn't set his sights on the company again. I couldn't take any chances, of course, I had to completely crush him. In the comforting eyes of my parents, I entered my own company and became my father's special assistant. As the daughter of the company's CEO, I certainly didn't need to be hands-on, but I studied crazily, worked hard, and my fierce determination shocked the entire company. My father, trembling with fear, asked me not to be so intense, to rest. I smiled and promised to continue working. Even the elders of the board constantly praised me, fully acknowledging me as the company's next successor. My efforts were not in vain, they truly helped me identify several potential pitfalls within the company. But no matter how tired I was, at dinner time, I would always bring the chicken soup the housekeeper prepared and rush to the hospital to see Bob, come rain or shine. My mother, frustrated, wanted to keep me at home, but I assured them, there was no such thing as a romantic relationship, that was completely non-existent. My father was afraid I would be brainwashed, so at meal times he would drag me to meet clients and negotiate contracts, and yes, at the dining table, several young, handsome, and well-off unmarried men would always appear. Are they clients too? I pointed to the spirited young man with 3 gold earrings and coldly asked my father. You didn't pick any of the previous ones, me and your mother thought you might like someone a bit different. But even if I like this kind, do you really dare bring him in as a son-in-law? My father immediately puffed up his chest. Daughter, as long as you leave that scumbag Bob, Dad can find whatever type of man you want. Seeing the sycophantic smile of the spirited young man, I fled the private room as if my life depended on it. Not even wanted by my own father, I opened my phone and told Bob I would visit him in the ward after 6:30. He coldly replied with an emoji. Under my excellent acting skills, he completely believed that I wasn't reincarnated. After several efforts, he also realized that he couldn't shift his injuries to me, and his attitude towards me started to deteriorate rapidly. I stood in front of the ward half an hour early. As for what I did in that half hour, naturally, I recorded the touching moments of mutual confidences in the ward. As far as I know, Betty had been by Bob's side all these days, and he was enjoying it. With 2 women loving him wholeheartedly, even competing and jealous, it greatly satisfied his male vanity. Although Bob accepted the fact of his accident, his temper became worse and worse. Perhaps that was his nature. He used to prefer to disguise it, but now he was just being reckless. At this moment, he was lying in bed, waiting for Betty to feed him grapes. I held my phone and carefully recorded this scene. Honestly, I truly admire Betty. After I was disfigured in my past life, Bob never kissed me again. Even in unavoidable intimacy, he would turn his head away. Looking back now, he was full of suppression and disgust, but I was too dependent on him, automatically ignoring the disdain in his eyes. But Betty was different. With Bob's face covered in a veil, she went up and kissed him on the mouth, showing no discomfort at all. Of course, with this emotional kiss, Betty could always receive generous rewards, new designer bags, sweet Dior perfumes, all sorts of luxury skincare products. After calculating the time, I knocked on the ward's door twice with force. After a 3-second pause, I walked in. Although the 2 had separated, Betty was still sitting very close, acting flirtatiously, stuffing a grape into Bob's mouth and then smirking at me triumphantly. I placed the chicken soup on the table, ignoring Betty's provocation. Bob showed a hint of embarrassment and swallowed the grape, then ambiguously tried to explain to me. Betty also came over to check that the nurse was taking good care of him. He coughed lightly again, his tone turning cold, filled with disappointment and reproach. "And you, what have you been busy with lately? It's been 2 or 3 days since I last saw you. You're my girlfriend, shouldn't you be by my side every day? Are you trying to leave me just because I'm disabled? Let me tell you, I can do just fine without you." As Bob spoke, he became increasingly agitated. "You think you can just rely on your family's money, wait until I recover, and you will have to beg me? Bet you're planning on emptying our family's wealth again once I'm back on my feet," he continued with a sneer. Betty quickly stood up to comfort him, shooting me a stern look in the process. "I joined the company. You know, I'm going to inherit the family business in the future, so I'm busy studying management now," I said, peeling an orange and handing it to him with innocence and coquetry in my tone. "Join the company? A girl like you learning how to manage a business?" Bob seemed shocked, pointing at me and shouting loudly, "When you marry me, all you have to do is stay at home and take care of the family." His relationship with Betty was no longer hidden, and now he was even thinking about marrying me. I turned to look at Betty, who was filled with resentment, fiercely pulling on Bob's bedsheet, trembling all over. Bob also noticed Betty's reaction and gave her a warning glance. "After I recover, you can talk to your father about letting me manage the company. I'll definitely take it to the next level," he said confidently. Watching him brimming with confidence, trying to follow the same path as in his past life, planning to drain our family's wealth again? Dream on. I almost couldn't resist spitting in his face. Bob waved his hand nonchalantly. "It's just an amputation. With today's technology, getting a prosthetic limb is no different from having a real one." These past few days must have been filled with a lot of self-reassurance for Bob. But is there really no difference? "Don't worry, Bob, you'll have a taste of it soon. Transfer some money to me. A friend of mine's girlfriend is pregnant and needs an abortion. She needs surgery fees and compensation for mental anguish." Betty gently pulled Bob aside, and he glanced around before adding, "And Betty has been taking care of me these past few days. You should compensate her for her hard work too. Transfer 100,000 to Betty first, and if that's not enough, I'll let you know." I nodded. "No problem, in 2 days then, as long as Betty is willing to continue taking care of you." 2 days later, Bob's bandage was to be removed. I was like a little girl eagerly awaiting to unwrap a gift, filled with excitement and joy. I still remembered unwrapping bandages in my previous life. At first, Bob tried to comfort me until he saw my half-destroyed face. A grown man himself, he screamed in horror and ran out of the ward. A few days later, his parents brought him back to see me, and he couldn't even look up. The nurse, already wearing gloves, stood behind Bob. His mother and Betty stood close, holding Bob's hands, soothing his restlessness with the gentlest of tones. Bob's father, who had been away on a business trip, had finally rushed back. Despite being disheveled, he didn't seem distressed by Bob's injury. In fact, he appeared quite pleased with himself. I deliberately had someone check his whereabouts, only to hear that his mistress was pregnant, and he had sent her to a safe place to give birth. In the past, Bob had been fine, and the child had not been kept. This time, however, Yang's father made a different choice. The bandage had just been removed in 2 rounds, and suddenly the door was pushed open. A group of 5 or 6 people walked in noisily, all of them being Bob's close friends. "Bob, we heard you're having your bandages removed today, so we came to cheer you on. Bob, is your leg injury okay now? When are you getting discharged? Let's go to that swimming pool together. I heard there are some new beauties there. Bob, let's go celebrate at the bar tonight. When you're all healed, shouldn't you treat your brothers to a meal?" If Bob could see their expressions now, his face would have surely turned dark. Through gritted teeth, he asked, "Who told you I was having my bandages removed today? Who let you come here?" The man leading the group paused for a moment, then casually grinned. "Didn't you tell Betty to inform us?" "Bob, of course, it was me. I informed them in the group chat. They wanted to see you for a long time, but you wouldn't allow it." "What's wrong with you?" Bob?" Bob glared fiercely at Betty, who looked puzzled. I, on the other hand, understood perfectly. Bob hadn't told his close friends about his injuries at all. With such a serious injury and an amputated leg, he was afraid of being laughed at. Having been in a secret relationship with Bob for a year, Betty was unaware. She had no idea how much this seemingly charming man valued his reputation. Before leaving last time, I casually muttered to myself, should I invite his friends to celebrate together? Upon hearing this, Betty quickly mentioned Bob in the group chat to all his friends, fearing that I would steal a march on her. Today, I dressed elegantly, hiding near the farthest door from Bob, watching the group of people interact insincerely, making me look forward to the unfolding drama. Bob couldn't find a way to tell them to leave, as they were all deeply involved in his family affairs, with the leading man being someone he couldn't afford to offend. Sitting in a wheelchair, Bob tightly grasped the handle, his eyes like knives piercing Betty, all while the nurse began to unravel the bandages from his head, one loop at a time. As the bandages on his head decreased, the atmosphere in the ward suddenly turned cold. Those who began with smiling faces were now frozen in shock in their places. After Betty's scream, the white bandage fell completely to the ground. All eyes were fixed on Bob's face. Shocked, fearful, disgusted. Of course, Bob remembered how disfigured I was, terribly ugly, but not to the extent that would elicit such exaggerated reactions from them. He hesitated, picked up the mirror prepared on the side, slowly lifted it to face him. This was my face? In the mirror, he saw his uneven, moon-like surface face, with a grayish hue. His eyebrows were all gone, and even his once handsome nose was missing half of it. Upon closer inspection, Bob realized that his left cheek was 2 circles smaller than his right cheek. This disfigurement was far more severe than anything I had experienced in my previous life. No. This couldn't be happening. Bob lifted the mirror and smashed it to the ground, the shattering glass flying in all directions, piercing the closest individuals with curses erupting instantly. I brought my brothers to see you, and you dare to smash the mirror. Hey, get out of here, he's still oozing pus on his face, will it be contagious? I smiled as I captured their panic and bewilderment, then edited the video and posted it to an account. Get out. Get out, all of you. Bob roared, almost breaking into a hoarse scream, as he began frantically smashing everything in the hospital room. Bob's parents, friends, and the woman he loved all passed by me with different thoughts, quickly leaving the room. Exhausted from the destruction, Bob clutched his head, gasping heavily. How could this happen? Mary's face wasn't this severe back then. I don't want to end up like this. I don't want this ghastly appearance. He kept asking why, but no one could give him an answer. I walked over slowly, took Bob's phone, and opened the account where the comments had reached thousands. I gently patted Bob's shoulder. As he looked up in his confusion, I moved the phone in front of his eyes. Look, they are all praising your strength, they all hope for your speedy recovery, their best wishes for you and Betty's lifelong happiness. My voice was gentle and tender, but it couldn't mask the malice in the comments. This man is scarier than Voldemort. I will have nightmares after seeing this. If I turn into this, I'll jump directly from the 18th floor. Bob, look, everyone hopes you can live well. Bob lifted his face, meeting my gaze with shimmering eyes. His whole body started trembling, like a severe Parkinson's patient. Mary, you know, just like me, we're both reborn. What are you talking about, Bob? Why can't I understand? He tried to grab my arm, but I dodged it. Bob, you are disgusting, don't touch me. I circled around the room, rubbing my face with both hands. It's a good thing I didn't go in to save you, or I would end up like you. How could I live like that? Seeing you makes me want to throw up, it's disgusting. I laughed loudly and repeated, disgusting to the extreme. Mary, I was wrong. I was wrong. Let's get back together, let's get married, let's register tomorrow. Bob broke down, trying to stand up but forgetting his right leg was already gone. Bob fell to the ground, curling up in agony, groaning incessantly, but I wasn't ready to let him off the hook. Bob, look at your face in the mirror, how repulsive. How dare you want me to stay by your side? But, you don't need to be too sad, without me, you still have Betty, right? You two are so in love, she won't mind your ugly face. I squatted down in front of Bob, raising his chin with my hand, carefully examining his destroyed face. Bob, do you believe in reincarnation? Before he could answer, I continued, if you hadn't tried to kill me back then, I might still be enduring all of this in that ghostly appearance for you. As I finished speaking, Bob's eyes widened with horror. You. I grasped his neck with my hand, reminiscent of Bob before his rebirth, choking him. If I strangle you now, will you still be reborn? Before he could react, I suddenly released my hand, losing the support of my strength, and he collapsed to the ground. That would be too easy for you, I thought. You are most suitable in this state now, Mary. Mary, forgive me, please, I love only you. It was my momentary madness, my confusion. I stood up, brushed off the non-existent dust from my dress, and opened the door of the hospital room. Bob collapsed completely, crying loudly, crawling towards the door in an attempt to stop me from leaving. No. Mary, don't leave me. Mary, please, please. I simply turned my head and uttered a despicable insult before closing the door on his hysterical wails. I instructed my father to withdraw the funding for Bob's company. Without our family's support, their financial chain rapidly collapsed, declaring bankruptcy in less than 2 months. I provided Bob's mother with the address of Bob's father's mistress. Before she became rich, she was a hot-tempered woman, and she brought along several people to the mistress's door, causing a huge scene that became public knowledge. Yang's father, resentful of his wife for losing their son, surprisingly testified in favor of the mistress in court. Though the judge did not consider the testimony, Bob's mother was still sentenced to 3 years for intentional harm. They all descended into chaos like a pot of porridge, and no one cared about Bob, who was still in the hospital. The once envied Yang was now someone not even a nurse would spare a second glance. When the war finally subsided, his father remembered his only remaining son. He took out what little money he had left and fitted Bob with a prosthetic limb. With the new prosthetic, Bob's mobility was extremely difficult, limping with a cane worse than before. Due to his disfigurement, Bob almost stayed home every day. If he had to go out, he would cover his entire face. He became increasingly insecure and sensitive, his mental state becoming extremely fragile, exploding in anger at the slightest provocation or if anyone stared at him a bit too long. Time came quickly to the eve of the wedding from the previous life. On this day, I specially sent Bob a big gift. I first put together a video of Betty and Bob being affectionate in the hospital room, making it into a beautiful memento format, and sent it to Bob. Then I sent another video to Bob using a fake account. This video was shot in a private room in a bar. Bob's good buddy who came to visit him in the ward was now flirting shamelessly with Betty. Betty was playing hard to get, wiggling her hips, hugging the man's neck and acting coy. Honey, what about the purse you promised to buy for me last time? The man pinched Betty's butt hard, a smug smile on his face. Did you also ask Bob for things like this before? Don't mention that, I'm telling you, he's a waste of space now. Betty initiated a kiss with the man. Laughter erupted in the private room, the camera panned around, capturing the laughing faces of everyone present, all of them Bob's good buddies. The last time Bob's name was mentioned was in the headlines of major news media. A disabled man showed astonishing explosive power on the street, wielding a knife and causing 1 death and 5 injuries. Betty died on the spot, the man in the private room and the other 4 brothers were all injured. Bob was struck several times with the knife in a chaotic attack, was taken to the hospital and miraculously revived. His father was extremely disgusted with his son, who kept causing trouble and associating with worthless individuals, and ultimately chose to disappear. Just before Bob was to be sentenced to death, I provided a report confirming Bob's mental disorder, as I still needed Bob to see firsthand how well I was living a life he didn't want. I sat in the garden of the psychiatric hospital beside Bob's bed, sipping coffee, watching Bob howl in agony on the bed, caught between the living and the dead. The cool breeze wafted over, carrying a hint of floral scent.